And here we are, Jeff. You and me.
Just you and
I
me.
thought this was going to be a full-blown musical number, but it turns out it's a duet tonight.
I guess so. We can't do the West Side Story Quintet, I guess.
Well, maybe can you throw your voice? I wonder, do you have
I
that
can
kind
do
of
all the
talent?
parts of that song if that helps. We're going to rock it tonight. We're going to jazz it up and have us a ball.
Well, speaking of lyrics, I should mention at the outset, I'm going to set some ground rules. We were kind of talking in the green room about this. We are, in fact, here talking about the 25th anniversary. Can't believe it's been a quarter century since the debut of South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut, the feature-length musical version of the South Park cartoon from Comedy Central. But as profane and anti-PC, anti-woke, whatever you want to call it. I mean, just truly mind-blowing stuff, especially if you've never seen it or if you're revisiting it after some time. It's quite profane and quote-unquote offensive in a lot of parts. So we are going to do our best to tap dance, if you will, around a lot of that. Not saying we won't let a few, the stray F or S bomb, float around here, but we're not going to be singing the Uncle Effer song. Very good. Thank you. Although it's such a good tune. Jeff, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Please, thank you very much. Pleased to be here.
I'm pleased to have you here. I suggested that you change your name on your little title card there to Broadway Jeff, because I'm glad we're talking about the South Park musical movie, because at this point, I was in my probably early 20s when this movie came out. And I didn't like musicals. And it wasn't until La La Land, however many years later, that I really started getting an appreciation for movie musicals. And now I love them. I haven't seen all of them, certainly, but I find it's a genre that in my late 40s, I'm discovering it as if I was like 5, and I love it. But South Park, when I found out they were making a movie, because I loved the TV show, I was all in. And then when I found out it was a musical, my heart sank a bit. When I got into that theater and the opening song, Mountain Town, and then the second song, the Terrence and Phillip Uncle Effer song, I was completely hooked. And I bought the soundtrack immediately after leaving the theater or shortly thereafter. And I put that thing on repeat. Like I wore out the CD, because it is not just a wonderful story, a masterful bit of parody, as Trey Parker and Matt Stone are known to do. They've been doing this for like 30 years or almost. Mm-hmm. It's also a hell of a musical, a lot of catchy tunes. So I want to talk about the whole shebang tonight with you as my guide to help me unpack just the depths of the cleverness and the understanding of musical history that the South Park movie has brought to us.
Well, it's funny because, to your very point, they probably could have just done a feature-length version of the show, made it a little bit dirtier or naughtier or more profane, and been just fine. But the thing that I like about Parker and Stone, and they've always demonstrated this on their show, and that is that despite the very sort of crude animation style and the very simplistic, almost childlike drawings that they've rendered their cast in, it's always belied the fact that it's one of the more sophisticatedly written and satires, still going strong after all these years, and they still do it because they love it and they're making fun of all the current craziness in our world. And they just didn't want to do an hour-and-a-half version of their show. They said, let's be more ambitious and do something bigger. So they said, let's do a parody of a musical. And the funny thing is, it's not just a parody of a musical, Ian, it's a great musical. I mean, they have great tunes. The melodies are written by Mark Shaman, who did Hairspray and a number of other shows, and as a great tunesmith. He always does the special Oscar numbers, like when Jack Black and Will Ferrell sang about, the saddest person at the Oscars is the crying clown and stuff. And of course, they wrote the lyrics, and I think they also worked with Pam Brady on the screenplay, who's been part of the show for a long time. And they write a show that, if you know Broadway and you know the tropes of musical theater, you're laughing, but then you're also kind of gobsmacked by the fact that these melodies and these songs really are good. They're integrated into the narrative really well, just the way a Broadway or regular musical would be. Movie musicals for all the years before it too. So it works on a number of levels, but mostly it's just this wonderful, ambitious thing that they decided to not just phone it in, not just do a quick cash grab and something sort of cheap and silly, but they really made a significant contribution, I dare say, to musical theater. I've often said this, and I'll say it here to just start us off with. I think there have been two wholly successful, great film musicals since 1972's Cabaret. One is one that nobody knows. They may have heard of it, but they've never seen it. And I recommend they do. And that's Little Shop of Horrors, directed by Frank Oz. It's really a terrific musical. They did a very good adaptation of it. It's scary. It's funny. It's a terrific show. And that's one. And then the other is South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, with that crazy title that I wonder if it's about censorship. I guess it is. But seriously, those are, I think, the two finest complete musicals put on screen since Cabaret. And the fact that one is an animated adaptation of a cartoon show on television is all the more impressive.
Right. Well, first of all, I don't know how obscure Little Shop of Horrors is, because I know lots of people love that movie.
True.
I think it.
I'm just not sure if like modern audiences know it all. It was '86, and it wasn't a big hit at the time, and I don't see it playing a lot on cable or whatever. But if they look it up and watch it, I think they'd be very impressed if they're open to being impressed by musical. But,
yeah, I mean, it's whenever it turns 40, which is is it 85 or 86?
I believe it was 86.
Okay. Well, at some point soon we'll be talking about that in the next couple of years, because that's
sure.
a great. I have not watched it in a long time, but occasionally I'll go on YouTube and just like look up a musical number from the film and play it, like Somewhere That's Green. I think is a really
terrific.
That is, South Park doesn't Bigger, Longer, Uncut doesn't have that same element of saccharine kind of emotion to the songs.
Right. There's a sweetness to Little Shop of Horrors.
There is, but there's also a wackiness, like Steve Martin. You'll be a dentist. It's got that great kind of a reveal. He's coming in like, he's like this tough street punk guy, and then you'll be a dentist. It's great. It's full of surprises all throughout the film. With South Park, instead of that, they weave the music, as you were saying, directly into the story, and all of the songs are different. I mean, they do like a medley or two here and there of blending everything, but you can't listen to the first song of the film and think, okay, now I know how the other songs are going to play out. They're all very different. They're from different characters' points of view, and not necessarily revealing about these characters. Sometimes they're just fun, like I'm super thanks for asking from Big Gay Al.
Yep, that's right.
Which I'm going to segue into something that you had wanted to mention, and we're going to have a little lesson on the 11 o'clock number. Jeff, what is the 11 o'clock number?
Well, it's funny. Like I said, this movie not only is a musical, very much like movie musicals, but even in some respects more so like Broadway musicals, but it bothers to follow the influences and the tropes and sort of the patterns of Broadway musicals. In the early days of musicals, probably in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, they generally had what they called an 11 o'clock number, because what they wanted to do in a musical, even though they have a serious story, and a lot of times these were musical comedies, but there's a seriousness to the story. Even in The Music Man, Harold Hill is found out and the townspeople is coming with the pitchforks, and what are they going to do to him and all that. They wanted the audience to have one last big laughing, funny number before the story is resolved in all its seriousness. So they used to put in what they called the 11 o'clock number right before the end of the show, which was probably a little bit before 11, but it was close to that. And sometimes shows would go after 11. And it was literally like the last song before the climax. And it was a comedy number. Now, in The Music Man, which I mentioned, it's Shapoopy. If you know that musical at all, Buddy Hackett sings it, and he's talking about, a girl dating and all this kind of stuff. And if you find the right gal, she's your Shapoopy. And it's just, they're saying poop, but it's Shapoopy, and it's a cute little phrase. But it's there just to be frivolous and light. Another example of it, and this is kind of a more dramatic one, in West Side Story, the original Broadway musical, the 11 o'clock number is Gee Officer Krupke. Now, Ernest Lehman, when he adapted it for the screen, said, we don't have to follow those rules because that's different in filmmaking. And since Gee Officer Krupke is a funny number, he moved it up earlier to be handled by Russ Tamblyn and the Jets. And plus, Tamblyn was a very good comedic actor, so it was perfect for him. But in the original Broadway musical, Gee Officer Krupke is the funny number right before Tony is shot and killed, and Maria is ready to shoot everybody else, and all the hell breaks loose. And it was this funny number to give them some relief, like, oh my God, I'm building up this tension. Here's relief. And And they have that in this movie before, as the resistance is going down and they're having this big war and we don't know what's going on with the devil and Saddam Hussein. And if Armageddon is due, Big Gay Al comes out and sings, "I'm super, thanks for asking." And it's just this throwaway fun number that he's feeling good about life, even though, all this stuff is going on around him dramatically. And they literally parody an 11 o'clock number with a really good 11 o'clock number given to that character to make us all stomp our feet and laugh one more time before the seriousness of the narrative is concluded. So it's just amazing that they did that because, like I said, maybe for the last 20 years or before, even when they were writing this, they kind of belied that. It wasn't as often that you'd find that. You would still find it, like in the Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, when the governor sings, "Ooh, I like to dance a little sidestep. Now you see me, now you don't." He talks about being a corrupt politician. That's the 11 o'clock number, and they threw it in the Best Little Whorehouse in 78. But in the 80s and 90s, as the big musicals like Les Mis and Phantom and some of those Andrew Lloyd Webber, Stephen Sondheim things became popular, they didn't have the traditional 11 o'clock number. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But Matt Stone and Trey Parker put it in South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut.
Which is weird because, I mean, their version of the big dramatic, grim climax is, Terrence and Phillip, the Canadian entertainers, being assassinated, their blood spilling on American soil, thus fulfilling the prophecy and summoning forth Satan and Saddam Hussein.
Yes.
Which is, it's hilarious, but it also does kind of work because there is a tension there. There are bodies flying.
Boy, they really needed that 11 o'clock number to alleviate that.
Right. It's funny because when you were describing this, I know it's a different time zone, but here in the Midwest, Saturday Night Live does have an 11 o'clock number for the people who still watch it. They have the half hour with the cold open, the monologue, a couple of skits, but then they do at about 11 o'clock. After the first half hour, they have the musical guest do the first number, and then they come back with the weekend update. So
that's right.
It's I don't know if there's any connection there, but we're talking about musical numbers. So,
but you're right because it's probably with the idea of breaking it up, giving the audience some sort of relief, so it's not all the same thing and keeps them on their toes and sort of surprises them.
Like, I'm tired of not laughing at these skits. How about some music?
At least we get the hottest musical acts and to cover for the fact that we're sort of dragging out these old creaky characters and obvious jokes about politics.
Sidebar. I just saw a Target commercial the other day, and it was Kristen Wiig doing her Target lady impression. I'm like, no.
See, that's when it becomes a parody of itself. It's probably time to start thinking of some other ideas.
Yeah, she had me wigging out. But
there you go.
So yeah, I alluded to the plot of this movie, and I guess we'll talk about it. But it's strange because this is, in a weird way, this is sort of a South Park origin story. Because the kids in town, Cartman, Stan, Kyle, little Kenny, they hear that they're making a Terrence and Phillip movie, and they are a Canadian comedy duo who I was thought they were supposed to be cartoon characters, but I'm getting the feeling they're apparently flesh and blood, entertainers, which is just strange because like those flappy, disconnected heads.
It's really weird.
South Park imagines Canadians, but they go see the movie and it's a hard R-rated movie, full of profanity and swearing. And I say it's an origin film because when the kids pay a homeless guy to pretend to be the adult to pay their admissions, they're sitting in this theater. And they're shocked by the language that's coming out of the screen because in the show, they would do like, the funny censor bleeps and everything.
Right.
And I was a bit worried. I remember back in '99 that having the actual swearing in the film might take something away from that, because to me, part of the fun of South Park was listening to all those censor bleeps. It's part of the gag.
Right.
But no, they go there, they hear all this profane stuff, and not just F-bombs and S-bombs, but like really graphic sex stuff. And they come out parroting this. They take it back to like the schoolyard, and Cartman is like, "I've seen the Terrence and Phillip movie. Who wants to touch me?"
Yes.
But the parents get wind of it and they're mortified, and then Terrence and Phillip come to represent the entirety of Canada, which is corrupting America's youth. And it was Kyle's mom becomes an anti-Canada activist, gets the government involved, and Kenny, who dies for real this time,
Mhm.
I guess, because he dies in every episode. That's the running gag of the TV show. But he dies and he goes straight to hell, where he encounters Satan and Satan's newish lover, Saddam Hussein, who was he eaten by bears or dogs or something like
Yeah,
that?
that's right. And of course, at the time, Saddam Hussein was kind of the big bad on the world stage. So it was, a pretty funny parody to go right after him.
Well, it's also in keeping with Parker and Stone's, when they do these movies that are kind of culture war political things,
Right.
they tend to feature a real world leader.
Hmm.
Because I know Team America World Police, which was 2004, 2005, that's got an anniversary coming up.
Yeah,
It was Kim Jong Il,
that's right.
was the mad dictator, and
That's
we got to
right.
talk about that one when it's coming up, man. But yeah, it's so weird to watch this time capsule of a film to think back to, as you mentioned, Saddam Hussein was still alive. The Iraq War hadn't, the second Iraq War hadn't happened yet. 9/11 hadn't happened yet.
Yeah.
When was it Stan or Kyle? I always get those two kids mixed up. When he first comes out of his house, this is just me looking back, but you see the house number on it's 2001. I'm like,
Oh,
this
wow.
is just strange.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but the whole conceit of this is the world is going to end because the nations are going to go to war over these not cartoon, but these foul-mouthed idiots who
Comedians. Yeah.
comedians who love farting on each other and talking about doing various horrible things to one another and their uncles. But in the midst of all this, there's a great kind of message, a subtext about censorship, about parental responsibility for paying attention to your kids, being aware of what they're watching, talking about it. Parents' secret lives, like Cartman's mom apparently was once into say German films.
Yeah.
It was a nice little reveal.
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
But yeah, what was your reaction seeing this in '99? I mean, I assume you had watched the show and were a fan of it.
Oh, yeah.
Did you consider this to be kind of an evolution of South Park? Was it more in keeping with what you had expected, or aside from the musical aspects, just in terms of the story?
For me, it might have been the first example of sort of what has now become the term, I guess, meta, where it's so much about itself while it's actually happening, that it almost felt like, you're kind of watching two versions of it, because there's the actual movie, but then there's also the commentary on the show and the movie that the movie is also making. But yeah, it was funny because I remember at the time there were two sort of prominent news stories always coming out of South Park. One is the outrageousness of who they went after and what they would satirize. And then the other part of that was people getting mad about it, that this was warping children and they didn't want them buying the plush toys or the stickers or the book covers and all that kind of stuff, because they thought the show was obscene. And even though they cut a lot of the language out for South Park, we knew what they were saying, or at least meaning to say. And heck, the material was already pretty edgy, even with those edits. So for me, it was I thought it was funny when they first announced it was called Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, the double entendre there, of course. But the fact that they were going to do stuff that they couldn't do on television, including the swearing, and they were going for the full R, seemed already sort of, meta, like, okay, they're already parodying their story and their fight every week just to keep the show on the air and not be sort of cut to ribbons by the censors. But when I saw it, the biggest surprise was they really put everything into this, and not only the musical numbers, but it's thoughtful, it's clever, and as clever as the songs get, they always make sure that you hear the right lyric too, that has the sort of message in it. Like as popular as Blame Canada was, and was nominated amazingly for best song that year, but they wouldn't let Stone and Parker do it. They had to have a movie person, so they had Robin Williams do it, which was great, and he did with if I recall, a like Rockettes line of kicking Mountie girls, or whatever, mountain ladies, Mounties, women as Mounties. It was very funny. But, the line in there goes about blaming Canada and everybody, including that Anne Murray too. Which is so funny that they throw in Anne Murray, because that's probably what most people remember Canada from at that time. Like, who's from Canada? Oh, that's right, that country western star from the 70s that mom and dad listened to. What? That's your reference point? Where have you been? Come on. But at the very end, they say, we we have to think of all these things to blame before somebody thinks of blaming us. And it's so true. The parents are always pointing the fingers at the schools or, Hollywood or, television and MTV and all those kind of things. Like, do you watch what your kids are doing? Do you know what they're doing? I mean, I remember, not to bring it down for a second, but when Cartman came out, the parents said, well, we let our children lock their doors, and we didn't know they had all this ammunition and guns. And it's like, well, don't let them lock their doors. They're still kids, and you should be aware of what they're doing and be watching them a little bit closer. Not that you can't love them, and not that maybe some of the kids are worth having a locked door occasionally here and now if they want, but why? If it's better for a parent to be involved and know what's going on and not be surprised like that because tragedy struck. And here, I think that's what Parker and Stone were saying is, you can find a boogeyman or a scapegoat or whatever you want to call the fall guy in all these instances. And they're often found throughout history, throughout culture, no matter what nation, what time period. But usually, they always say when you point the finger at somebody else, you have 4 fingers pointing or 3 fingers pointing back at you. And that's kind of what they're doing here, which is pretty smart.
Yeah. I mean, I watched a lot of South Park when I was, younger, but I mean, the show's been on since it feels like almost as long as The Simpsons. Not quite, but it's giving a run for its money. And I've kind of only watched a handful of episodes in the last couple of decades. But it is amazing that as our culture wars kind of explode and evolve and change over the years, you can always look back to a South Park episode. People love bringing it up because Parker and Stone are so kind of prescient as to,
Right.
Either they've got the thumb on the pulse or they seem to have the ability, even if it's just like, hey, wouldn't the world be completely batshit crazy if this happened? And then it just kind of happens. I mean, I don't want to get like completely controversial here, but there's that whole thing about like, was it Macho Man Randy Savage or someone who was just like him wanting to like compete in women's sports and like win medals and stuff. And people are like, oh, whatever. And now you bring that up and it outrages a completely different set of people. It's like, hey, why bring that up? I'm like, well, why not? I mean, it was a joke, 10 years ago.
In some respects, I think Stone and Parker regard South Park almost as maybe I know this is a little bit of a reach, but maybe their political cartoon. And I used to know Jeff McNally of the Chicago Tribune. We worked out at the same club and we talked often. And I asked him about it. I said, is it hard to face that blank page every day and, look at sometimes these very tragic or serious issues and wonder what to draw? And he said, but that's the fun of the challenge, is that you have to find something to make fun of. And because they are such obvious targets, it becomes almost noble, to do it. And he felt that, he wanted to be funny, he wanted to be a good draftsman, which he certainly was. He's one of the best illustrators ever in that field. But he also felt it was sort of his duty to take them down. And I think Stone and Parker feel that way. And they're an equal opportunity, attacker. They've attacked the left and the right, and when they deserve it, rightfully so. But they've also been, I think, ahead of the game on some of the things too, and the lies and sort of, the shirking of parental responsibility as children get farther and farther afield. And I think it's interesting that their four main characters here are so arguably not children in many respects. But I think this is the world we've now been in for a long time, where the internet and the computer and other things give people so much more access to stuff that we would have never thought about when we were that age. But it's all part and parcel of it today. And yet, I don't know if we're better for it by and large. I think there's always arguments to be made on both sides. But there's also an old adage, and I don't mean to be the old guy with the adages, but for every great remarkable achievement or invention in the world, there is sort of the natural law of order or whatever, where there's a bad reaction, a negative reaction to it, that it's created something terrible. Yes, we now have phones that are basically computers in our hand, but we don't like to talk to each other, and we don't use it really as a phone. So nobody's talking to each other, having conversation, which when I was in high school, it was a big deal to get on the phone and talk to a girl or your buddy for an hour or so. And mom would say, get off the phone, because we were talking too much. But so we get access to the world and the internet and information right at our fingertips, and yet we don't know how to talk to one another, or don't want to talk to one another. So I think that's what Stone and Parker continually say throughout their 30 years, or how many years the show has run now, that they're just looking at it and saying, it keeps fresh for us too, because there's always something new to discover and editorialize.
Well, it's also I mean, these guys have to be, I mean, in their 50s, like pushing
Yeah.
60
Oh
now,
yeah.
but they still like you. I think the most recent South Park I watched was because everyone was talking about it, and it was also kind of in my wheelhouse or on my radar, was the Kathleen Kennedy episode from a few
Yep.
months ago. And I'm watching this, and I'm like, these guys are as sharp as ever. There's no sanding of the edges.
Right.
You don't feel like, "Oh, I'm getting older now. I'm feeling
Yeah.
more
There's
kind
no
of conservative or
sentimentality.
whatever." Right. It's just like, this is funny. This is,
Hmm.
this is wrong, or this needs to be addressed or whatever.
Hmm.
Regardless of, I mean, you kind of get a sense for where they fall on that particular topic, but it's still sharp. One of the things that, as you were just talking about the phones, I realize this is a movie 25 years old now, where you've got a bunch of kids and they're like playing and they're going to the movies and they're talking to each other, they're hanging out, and no one's on their phones, or they're not like in their separate houses just like texting each
Right.
other. If you want to talk to your friend, you have to like go over to their house,
Yeah.
little hopping animations.
Yes.
Um it's like such a time capsule in so many different ways. I assume that the show, I should go back and watch it like more regularly, but I don't- assume they're not all just like texting and stuff. There's this fantasy world where in 2024 the kids of South Park are still hanging out and communicating like human beings.
Yeah, I think there's a more of that than probably not. I haven't seen it as avidly as years past, but I think like The Simpsons. My guess is they find it sort of an oasis where they can sort of work unfettered, probably not interfered with too much by networks and people giving them notes and stuff. It's successful, makes money for them. The funny thing is, and I used to do the Butterfinger commercials for The Simpsons back in the day. And when I was working on it, they were coming up on their, I think, 10th or 12th anniversary. And the producer who worked with us from the show was wondering how long it could go on. And I said, well, my guess is that you will probably be able to go on as long as you want because you are so successful and it comes with merchandise and everything else. And then years later, I discovered, as she did too, I'm sure, that the audience probably ages out of it, but then there's new people who come in. Like I remember when my nieces were into The Simpsons, like, oh my God, I was into The Simpsons 10 years ago. And that's so, I've so gone beyond that now, even though I'll still watch the Treehouse of Terror and some of or horror. Those episodes are excellent, or one that you hear about, you catch. But yeah, there's new audiences coming. I think that's probably happened with South Park. And to some degree, I think, animation is still kind of a novelty because for most kids, they know all the Disney stuff or the Despicable Me kinds of characters and some of the Disney stuff that's a little bit sillier and aimed at younger children. Nothing wrong with any of that, but it's a lot of times for preschool stuff that, and then they get into school and they change their taste some. But this is telling them, oh, this is animation, that it can be adult, it can be controversial. Just because it's drawn pictures and looks a little bit childlike doesn't mean that it is. And I think that's a great thing for teenagers to discover, probably, who become the new audience every 5 or so years because they're watching and they're like, oh my God, this is such a nasty, mean, funny show, and turn that stuff on and become Fox watchers on Sunday night.
Well, it's also, I mean,
Or Comedy Central on whatever.
right.
This, I think, is Wednesday night. I'm not sure.
Tonight is Wednesday night.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. No,
See, we're
I
paying
just,
homage.
well, the thing is, like, I'd be curious to find. I mean, I'm sure they're out there, but like, young filmmakers, young animators watching South Park and that whole thing of like, I could do this, and kind
Mhm.
of developing a love for a new kind of art form and following that passion to becoming a filmmaker, because you look at it, it is deceptively simple looking. I love that I watched this on a Blu-ray, which I can't imagine if anybody in 1999 imagined, oh yeah, someday people are going to be watching this in crisp detail on these giant
Yes.
televisions. Like, it wasn't meant for that. It's paper cutouts.
Right, right.
But it's funny because you can still see the shadows on the characters. Like,
Mhm.
you've got Stan, standing like in the foreground, and there's a great perspective shot going way off into the distance, and yet you can still see his shadow on the flat
Right,
blank,
right.
the flat behind, flat behind.
Yeah.
Haven't had nearly enough coffee, but no, it's quaint looking, but because it's a movie, they do some things that they don't do in the cartoon show, such as the 1997 Spawn movie era graphics when they go into hell. They do this like
Yes.
3D animation. I can't remember. I remember watching in 99. I wasn't thinking this is cutting edge stuff. I mean, this looks really cheesy and bad, but I felt like it was supposed to be really cheesy and bad, even though those special effects were pretty, early, I guess, cutting edge. It was like first pass 3D animation of those
Sure.
demons and hellscapes and stuff.
Mhm.
But and then they had some nice, what I'll call After Effects things of like Kenny flying up into the cosmos,
Yes.
those light trails behind him, and he sees that cadre of large-breasted nude women of all different colors and creeds.
Yes. His
South
version
Park
of
was,
heaven, I guess. Yeah, as they say.
yes, South Park was an equal opportunity, I guess, offender, or I don't know, that wasn't offensive, I guess. It was great that he access denied. That giant red screen comes up and he plunges down into hell. That wonderful rock,
Yeah.
metal tune. I guess, like, getting back into the music of it, what was the standout, I guess, song for you? What was the one that you really went away humming, not just because it was catchy, but also because it was clever? I know we talked about Blame Canada, but was there another kind of standout song for you?
Well, I think that one, in some respects, was the funniest because it was also a little bit of a parody of a patter song, where a patter song was made famous by Gilbert and Sullivan, where you have a lot of sort of tongue twisting words and lists, and you sort of say it fast in the Pirates of Penzance or Ruddigore and things like that, and the Mikado. So for me, I was probably leaning into some of the songs that were more clearly parodies of style of music. I mean, the opening one where they're singing about the town is, for most people, it's like, oh, of course, that's the parody of the first song that Belle sings in Beauty and the Beast, when, she's talking about this provincial life and we're introduced to all the characters, and Gaston says, and someday I'm going to make her my wife. There must be more than this provincial life. That's a parody of that, and people are laughing in the theater knowing that's so recent and that's their reference point. But almost every musical starts off with context, like, here we are, here's the setting, here's how are things in Glockamora, well, here we go, and those kind of things. And so for me, right off the bat, that song took me out. But I also think like the Resistance song, which is such a parody of Les Mis, was funny. But they're all good. I mean, I don't think there was a weak song in it. But I honestly probably blame Canada just because here's the kind of real, let's skewer the parents who are complaining about, oh, they're watching this show and getting all these bad habits. Like, then don't let them watch. Have some influence as a parent. It's that simple, Mom and Dad. Don't blame us any more than you would Canada. But I liked them all, and like I said earlier, obviously I have some affection for the 11 o'clock number because it's such a throwaway bit, but it's hilarious. And, there's some naughty sort of buildups, and then he doesn't quite go in the direction that he wanted to. So for me, I guess I like it all, but those maybe are the standouts, just because for me, they were also working on the level of parodying something that was like, oh, that's pretty clever how you're taking that right from the tropes of Broadway, for those who know it, not just the version of it in Beauty and the Beast, which they were doing too. That's them paying homage to the opening Broadway numbers that established the town and the place. But doing all those other numbers that do the same kinds of things, it was just genius.
And I think you could go the Mad Magazine route, where
Right.
you're literally taking the lyrics, or a Weird Al, taking lyrics and the melody of a song and just substituting, instead of I'm bad, it's I'm fat, or,
Right.
I'm living in
Right.
an Amish paradise. But what they did so brilliantly, to your point, is pay homage to these songs and make them funny, so that they are recognizable in what they are, how they're placed in the movie, what purpose they serve, but you come out singing these completely original tunes. I mean, I think my two favorite ones are three, tied for three. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm going to say this title. I said we were going to limit the swearing, but I can't just say it. It's Uncle Fucka. Uncle Fucka. And you can say that because it's the A and not the ER.
That's right. You're from New Jersey.
Yeah.
Or the East Coast.
And then, what would Brian Boitano do?
Oh, that was hilarious.
it's so ridiculous, but it's just also such an amped up song about this guy. It doesn't matter who it is. Brian Boitano could have been a completely fictional character, but he's just got gusto and he's fighting for what is right and he doesn't give up. It's just I got listening to it last night, I got completely amped up. I'm like, yeah, what would Brian Boitano do? He'd get all the kids in town and probably kick an ass or two. That's what Brian Boitano would do. And then also, as you mentioned, La Resistance, mostly because in the medley portion of the film, where that comes into play, they're singing all of the different songs, these reprises, and the one kid that Wendy liked, I think it was, I can't remember his name, but he was like the obnoxious guy that she was into, or he was into her, and
Right.
he sings a line that almost gets lost in the mix of the rest of what's going on around him. And it wasn't until I listened to that like a few times on the CD that I was like, oh my God, that's what he's saying. And the lyrics are, they're seared into my head. They may cut your dick in half and serve it to a pig. And though it hurts, you'll laugh and dance a dickless jig.
I mean, and that's like got an internal rhyme scheme to it, which is also a parody of Sondheim. It works on a number of levels, but it's very funny. And for them to take something that is so filthy of language and yet find a way to give it a sophistication like that is a pretty wonderful juxtaposition, paradox or whatever you want to call it, which I think is the whole appeal of South Park in its essence, because it looks so crude and yet it's so sophisticated. It looks so and sounds often so blunt and nasty, and yet they're often saying very funny, specific parodies of society and politics or celebrities, et cetera, et cetera. I also love the fact that they don't have the sacred cows that some people would have, and they probably were thinking, well, if it makes me laugh, I'm going to do it. I mean, of all people, Winona Ryder to somehow call out and then give her this, cliche Thai ladyboy trick or whatever the hell it is that they would do in some of these, sleazy bars and stuff. And then they don't show it, but you hear it and you see the reactions to it. And the fact that somebody probably said, really, Winona Ryder, she's so sweet. And they went, yeah, that's why we're doing it, because she is so sweet. And those sacred cows just get tossed aside, and it's very, very funny.
This sacred cow, it's daring to a point. I got to push back on this sacred cow, this particular side of beef, because I think it was spared from the Big Mac factory at the 0 hour, and I'd forgotten about it. I'd forgotten that when she comes out into that USO stage. First, it's just a funny gag, like USO show starring Big Gay Al and Winona Ryder. You see it like on a commercial, like, oh, that's cute, but then they actually do it, right? But she comes out, she does this ping pong trick. You just see her bare legs like in a V, and you see the reaction of the people in the USO crowd, and you see the ping pong ball coming out and hitting people in the face. They pull the punch, and I forgot about it because I was watching it last night, and I was like, oh, I forgot how amazing this was. But then they show her, they cut to a frontal view, and she's just sitting there with a ping pong paddle doing the ping pong balls.
Right.
I wonder if they had to add that in like right before the print, because someone was like, yeah, Winona Ryder's attorney is on the phone. And
well, it's funny you say that, Ian. I hadn't thought about it until just now. But when I watched it, I seem to recall, now that you bring it up, there were 2 cuts they had to make to not get an NC-17 rating. I think they added that ping pong paddle shot to sort of pull that punch, as you accurately described it, because I think just leaving it to the imagination was a little risque. The other one, I think, had to do with how graphic the Saddam and devil scene in Bad got. I think it got a little more graphic, and they had to trim some of that footage, if you will. But that's what I remember hearing at the time. But I don't know if anybody's copped it. Maybe one of your listeners, our listeners tonight, knows. But apparently there were a couple of cuts they had to do to make it R-rated and not NC-17, which is shocking. But the NC-17 rating is weird the way, especially when it was working, and they were trying to make it work for some films back then, and it was silliness. I mean, Henry and June, remember, got originally an NC-17 rating. I think maybe that's what it was released with, because of one lesbian sex scene. It's like, my God, we've been through the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and all other kinds of crazy sex and violence, and then that scene is the one that pulls the like kids are going to go see that anyway. It's an adult love story based on Henry Miller, so I don't think they were exactly going to be lining up for that under 16. But anyway,
I've never seen Henry and June. I
yeah.
remember it being the first NC-17 film. I was, I think, 13 when it came out, so I wouldn't have been able to see it anyway. But when I was old enough to watch it, I was kind of freaked out because my neighbors growing up, I was best friends with their daughter and son. Their names were Henry and June. They were a married couple. So in my mind, I was like, I don't want to see a steamy
That's
sex
funny.
movie starring my ex-neighbors. No.
Yeah, how dare they have those names? Darn it.
I know. I've got weird hangups, Jeff.
That's all right. It's okay. We all
But
do.
here's the thing, like, assuming those cuts exist, then this movie is false advertising. It is not, in fact, uncut.
It isn't, unless they
Yeah.
were referring to something else, which maybe was the Saddam Hussein scene.
No, because the Saddam Hussein thing, that thing was cut. And,
yeah, that's true. It was circumcised, wasn't it? That's so funny.
Again, watching this as an adult, we kind of talked about this before the show. When I was in my early 20s watching it, I was a huge fan of Tarantino, still am. Loved profane humor. I mean, my dad bought me Andrew Dice Clay's Dice Rules when I was like 12. So that's the kind of house I grew up in. But now that I'm older and I'm a dad and I got to watch my mouth and all that other stuff, there is something about like overt, like excessive profanity that just does kind of like grate on me. But watching South Park, the movie, all these years later, brought me right back to that mindset, partially because it's not gratuitous for gratuity's sake. It is saying something. Plus, it's throwing around these F-bombs and everything, but it's very funny. It's not just rattling them off. It's, you know, the whole thing where Cartman gets a V-chip. So every time he says, you know, swears, he gets electric shock.
Yes.
And he's like tumbles off the screen because he can't control himself. And then the V-chip, the swearing, it malfunctions and it becomes his superpower and allows him to go Super Saiyan and blow away the demons from hell. What is this movie? Who thinks of this stuff? It's crazy.
Yeah, it's really funny. Well, and it's kind of a metaphor for saying that, you know, you can use language as its own power. I mean, I remember at the time, not too separate from that time, if I remember, Eve Ensler wrote the play, The Vagina Monologues. And one of the parts in that play is where they're taking the C word and saying it over and over again to sort of give women the power of it and back to them and not make it just a swear word. I don't know if that's entirely successful because I think that word isn't used very often and it's too often used in a derogatory way. But I think in this movie, they were probably trying to take some of the onus off of language and maybe suggest that it is only language. It's not really as violent as some other things that people could be protesting that runs across their television or movie theater screens. But it is funny. I agree with you. In fact, as I age, I find that a lot of times swearing is used too much as a crutch to give it edge or give it nastiness or, oh, we want to show that this is a tough, mean character, so he's going to be profane or talk terrible and all this kind of stuff. And I think there's limits to that. And, you know, it works a lot of times with Scorsese and Tarantino, and they're dealing with awful people. But I have to say that there's a lot of times when I've revisited episodes of The Sopranos, and, you know, HBO could get away with all kinds of things being streaming, one of the first streaming platforms, or, you know, not TV, HBO. But there's too much swearing. And I know that people swear a lot, and even in the profession of advertising, which we know very well, a lot of businesses are often colorful in language, but it gets to be too much. I mean, I thought even in like things like Tropic Thunder, you know, the part that was really funny about the Tom Cruise Les Grossman character is that he was just so vicious and so angry and just, you know, get the out of my sight and all this kind of stuff. And you know, they started off by having him being very profane, but I think as the characterization went on, it didn't need the profanity. The profanity that worked best as it went on was when he came up with very clever uses of it to describe somebody or call him a name. But there, you know, I think profanity quickly loses its effect. And the more I hear it when I'm watching movies and stuff, I don't know if it needs it. I love Jackie Brown. I think it's one of Quentin Tarantino's best movies. But it is hard to watch sometimes the scenes with Samuel Jackson because he swears so much. And he says, of course, the N-word all the time, which is, you know, one of the big criticisms that Tarantino has fielded all of his career. But I'm with you. Here it's funny, but I think there in its glory to sort of take the onus and the power off those words, because after a while you realize the really powerful words and the words that have the most impact are the lyrics, which are really clever, and word plays and everything else.
True. I mean, yeah, Jackie Brown. It's weird because Sam Jackson has sort of become a parody of himself twice in his career. Once as the profane guy, and then the other as the "What's in your wallet" guy.
Yes.
My God.
Yes.
But going back to the vagina monologues, I remember that there was some consternation over the people putting it on. They weren't sure if it was going to do well, but they ended up having a huge opening.
Right.
Sorry, I was making a terrible joke there.
That's good. That was very good. Yeah, I'm not going to, we could go on for the rest of the show if we wanted, I'm sure, but we shan't.
Darn
But
it.
no, but, but hey, there might be a future for you, Ian, working for Mr. Stone and Parker.
They'd never have me.
Uh,
No, there is an art to, there's an art to profanity. I think this is a classic example of how to write a story and how to present a comedic story. There was something, it was like a year, maybe two ago, where Parker and Stone, I assume they were invited. They were giving, it kind of like stepped into a class full of like young writers and were giving advice about storytelling and how to break down a story.
Oh, I remember that. I think I saw that on YouTube, actually.
I'm gonna after this show is over, probably tomorrow when the main like video goes up, the replay, I'm gonna find and put the link down there, because one of the things that is great is these guys aren't just like joke machines. They understand how great television, and even as we see how great movies work, there's an art to it, there's a precision. They make it look so easy, but when they get into the science of it, you're like, wow, I really need to pay attention. I think the criticism, or what they were trying to address in that lecture, was there's a whole generation now, almost two practically, of people who have come up watching snarky meta television, from South Park to The Simpsons to Buffy the Vampire Slayer to all this stuff. They're not going out and having like enriching real life experiences that could fill them with, funny stories or anecdotes or trauma or whatever. It's just reference on reference on reference. And they're losing this idea of like, well, we don't have to come up with something original. We can just come up with something ironic or referential, and that's enough to get enough clapter and clicks to give us the next episode. And they came in and said, no, you really, if something's going to work comedically, here are the beats, here's how you set this up, here's how you pay things off. And it was just really refreshing. Plus, from what I remember, they still looked like they were, 25 years old, which I don't know how they pulled that off.
No, it was great. I remember it too, because it was a master class in sort of the basics of writing and storytelling. And in some respects, it works for novels or plays or movies or TV shows, because you have a character's journey and he has to change somehow, or something changes him. He's got an obstacle. It's funny. You held the book up a couple weeks ago, but I have often bought it for friends and recommended Save the Cat, because I said, look, if you're a movie fan, read Save the Cat, because the most interesting about it is not, here's what you need to do if you want to be a writer in Hollywood, which is great too. It's a very simple, smart start for anybody who's thinking about that. But it shows you how movies are really the same kinds of stories, and what those 10 or 12 stories are being retold over and over again, really from the beginning of time, because there's only so many sort of ways of categorizing something. There's an obstacle, but is it the monster in the house that the person has to get rid of, which can be Fatal Attraction, Jaws, or Dracula, or is it the sort of the unattainable item, whether it's Raiders of the Lost Ark or Jason and the Argonauts or things like that. The romantic thing is like finding somebody who sort of completes you, and that can be a dog. A love story is often, Lassie was a love story, even though it was a family drama, but it's really a friendship story, and the love between the boy and his dog, just as much as La La Land or The Notebook, are movies about finding the right person, and maybe that you can't live with that person for whatever reason, be it sickness or ambition or career or such. But all the stuff that Parker and Stone were saying is also there. And I think it's fascinating because there you realize that we only have so much time in any given novel, movie, show to tell the story. And people would say sometimes, well, it's too much, hitting the beats I don't like it that you have to do this at 30 minutes, but of course they all do, because in a movie that's 2 hours, you have kind of the thing that changes what you think is the story at 30 minutes. And then at 60 minutes, it completely kind of usurps what the hero or the audience was expecting in a number of ways. And then at the 90-minute mark, it doesn't look like he's going to win. And then, you then have the last half hour to hopefully get him to at least learn something, if not win. But we expect that, and that's how stories always are. They're in everything from Dickens to Edgar Allan Poe to whomever, no matter how short or long the tale is. But Stone and Parker were smart enough to say, doing a parody of shows or doing the parody of stuff is not storytelling. It's just a parody. Even if you're going to do a parody, you still have to follow the rules. And I love that. And they do that here. We're doing a musical, and yet musicals still have rules. The song has to come out of the material. It can't just be thrown in there because it's a fun place for a song. It usually has to be characters saying which they cannot express as fully if they were just saying it. So it's a much more emotional expression of their feelings. Comedy or dramatic ones have certain places in the narrative, even if there's a comedy one right before the big resolve of the drama that's been told, because we have to let that audience have a little relief before we ring them out.
Yeah, I love Save the Cat, and unfortunately, because I've read that book, I now expect certain things
Oh yeah.
from movies, and I can kind of tell when people have read Blake Snyder and when they have
Yep.
no idea at all. And I brought it up last week because we were talking about A Quiet Place Day One, and I don't remember if I made the point or if I didn't get it across. I think I had meant to say it. I was thinking about the show before we went on. But Lupita Nyong'o's character, that opening scene when she's in group therapy and she's kind of like deriding everybody and saying everybody's
Yep.
shit, everything is shit. I can't remember if we'd even seen the cat at that point. I don't think I knew that she had a cat, but I was thinking of Blake Snyder Save the Cat, because for those who don't know, Save the Cat is a shortcut for how you establish a heroic or noble character. It doesn't have to be them saving a cat, but very early on in the film, they should do something noble or heroic, or to bring you on their side, to say, this is a
Right.
person I want to follow. She did the opposite of Save the Cat, and that popped into my head. I'm like, this is the anti-Save the Cat moment, because I don't like this person. Within the first 2 minutes of her opening her mouth, I'm like, I don't want to watch the next 2 hours with her. And sure enough, at the end of the 2 hours, I'm like, yeah, I didn't want to spend that time. My instincts were correct. One thing
Yeah,
we
they
didn't
save
talk
the
about—
cat throughout the movie, but the cat kind of saves them at times too. So it's kind of a weird version of it. But it's funny.
the cat saves the movie, Jeff, because without
That's
that
very
cat,
true. No, that's very
completely
true. We
miserable.
agreed on that. That definitely that cat is easily the best thing, and the way they treat that cat as a real character, I think, makes the movie I think worth seeing. But I know you didn't. But what it's clearly its best asset for sure. I'll tell you one thing, Ian, that I'll ask you this if you find this. The one thing that I always look for in a screen, anything I see on the screen, and more often than not movies versus TV, but when I'm watching it, I'm like you. It's like, shit, I've got Blake Snyder in my head. I know his things, and I'm looking for these things, and it's getting close to that half hour. It's going to come anytime soon now. Boom, there it is. But the one that I judge a movie on, whether I think they've really taken it to heart more than just taking it to sort of their intellect, and that is, how did they introduce the theme? Because that's very tricky. And in Blake Snyder, it's in Blake Edwards' movies too. But anyway, Blake Snyder talks about how it has to be kind of announced, but you want it to be announced cleverly, like not, here's what it's about, and I'm following that. And I'll tell you where it is in The Godfather. And it's a subtle line. It's a very subtle line. It's when Michael is sitting there with Diane Keaton as his girlfriend, Kay. And Michael and Kay are talking about who that man is, Luca Brasi, who's this and that. And he's talking about, and she's starting to realize, oh my God, this is total mob. And he says to her, that's not me, Kay. that's my family, but it's not me. And that's the theme. How soon or how will he become that? And so he can't say that anymore. And that's, but it's not like him saying like, I will never be that like my killing father. You know, he doesn't say it as blatantly as maybe some writers would do. Well, that's what Blake Snyder is telling me to do. I got to make it obvious. And you'll see movies sometimes where it's very, very obvious, like, oh Jesus, you know, these people are lacking sophistication. But
well, that is a great line, and it always stuck out to me. But mostly because of the delivery. But now that you're underscoring, I'm like, yeah, that's Michael Corleone trying to convince his girlfriend, but
yeah,
also I think himself.
yes.
And you wonder, I haven't watched the Godfather movies in, you know, a few years, but you know, I've always kind of pictured it as he comes home, he's kind of the war hero, and he's thrust into the family business because his siblings and, you know, keep dying, and his you know, younger brother's or older brother Fredo is a screw up, and then dad dies, and he kind of has to take over this business to save what's left of the family. But I almost, and I do, Francis Ford Coppola, if you're listening to this, I do not want a Godfather prequel movie or series or TV show. That's not what I'm saying. Please stop. People at Paramount, don't get this in your heads.
Well, and
I have wondered, like, what his life was like. Were those seeds of what he could be there all along, or was this really his kind of fall from grace as it's his rise to power? Because you're right, that line is very revealing. It's almost like, my dad was an alcoholic, but that's not going to be me. But that doesn't mean you don't have the gene in you that says, you know, you probably shouldn't, you know, start picking up bottles.
Well, it's funny you say that, and not to end on The Godfather, but it's my favorite movie. So one of my favorite movies, and maybe the best movie of all time. But there's so much to find in it, and I think one of the fascinating parts about the sequel, The Godfather Part 2, which Coppola did not want to make, he thought the movie was already completed by having Michael make this incredible arc from war hero to, you know, mob boss. But the thing that I thought made Godfather 2 exceptional was two things. One is the idea of saying, okay, we're going to show sort of the positive ascent, if you will, of Vito, trying to help the neighborhood, trying to help his family, trying to do good things to just make them not, you know, ugly, poor, frowned upon, spit upon immigrants, which it's very much about the immigration story there. Along with Michael's ascent, his path to the top, which is so ugly and so unnecessary and so vicious. And ultimately, he doesn't do it for really anybody but his own insecurity. And he's left alone at the end where, you know, at the end, Vito's got his family around him and is happy, and the neighborhood is now loving him, and he's great. But people forget, I'm sure you don't, but the last scene in the movie is with Michael sitting there brooding on Lake Tahoe alone, vanquishing all of his enemies and looking no better for it. And it flashes back to the night of Pearl Harbor, and they're celebrating Vito's birthday, who's going to be coming in, and all the cast members are there. You remember that Sonny brings in Connie's his friend. What's Connie's husband's name in it? Why am I blanking on that?
Oh, the guy who beat her up?
Yeah, what's his name? I forget his name right now.
I don't remember.
I'm sorry, I can't remember. Anyway, but he's bringing him as a friend. He introduces him to Connie, sort of setting up that, oh, there's going to be, you know, in fact, she takes him in the kitchen to help him get ready for, and so there's kind of that established. And Michael announces that he's joined the army. And, you know, Duvall, as Tom says, you know, your father has big plans for you, you know, he's thinking about politics and stuff. And that comes back when, you know, he was thinking about, I thought you'd maybe be, you know, Senator Corleone, Governor Corleone. And the funny thing about it is Michael sits there, he's smoking, and he looks like that evil, dead-eyed person that he is at the end of The Godfather Part 2. And that's how he started it, if you will, in the prequel, which is in that last scene. Because he's like, you're going to make my future for me, Tom? You know, and he's just kind of being cold and like, hey, I did this, and I'm not thinking about Pop. I'm not thinking about you. And he's pretty tough. And also, I think it's ironic that, of course, he goes and is a war hero, but he got used to killing too. You know, he's got a bunch of medals on his chest, and probably was seen combat because he signed up, he said, for combat. And then, you know, Sonny was teasing him about, people shooting at you, you're going to shoot back and all that kind of stuff. So the groundwork was kind of laid there, which is fascinating because it then makes that line all the more ironic. It's not me, and it already is kind of him. And that last scene in The Godfather Part 2 shows that.
You know, damn it, I got to watch The Godfather.
You could just find that scene, I'm sure, on YouTube and just watch that. And
I don't know. I
sort of
got to
thing.
do it justice, Jeff. You don't just watch
I know.
scenes from The Godfather. You watch The Godfather,
Yes,
okay?
yes, yes.
But no, I've seen that movie probably 10 times in my life. It was one of my
Mhm,
dad's favorite films, and I didn't really
mhm.
appreciate it until after it was gone. But I remember that scene you're talking about, the end of Godfather 2. I just never paid much attention to it. I didn't pick up on the fact that it was like the Pearl Harbor Day. I
Mhm.
just recall the family kind of gathering, but I think I'd been so my brain was still on the other events of the movie that I wasn't really paying attention to what was going on around that kitchen table. So yeah, you've given me a lot to chew
Well,
on.
and it's funny too because Brando isn't in that scene. The last thing is, "Oh, Dad's here." You know, they all run to the door, and Michael sits there alone smoking, and he's isolated, and he's all alone there too. So it wasn't that
Damn.
surprising that he ended up isolated at the end of Godfather 2, vanquishing all of his enemies. Because in some respects, he's always been kind of, marching to his own drummer and not necessarily concerned with sort of the family and tradition.
Well, that's another, as you're pointing out, level of isolation. If he wanted to go on the kind of straight and narrow, he was probably deliberately shut out from a lot of
That's
important
right.
conversations and bonding and rites of passage. All right, well, let's take a look at what Petty has to say. Petty, you're back.
Oh, hey.
Hey, Ian, Jeff. As always, I'm late, but I arrived, Ian, with a new gadget for the microphone. What is it? You talking about this thing? Or maybe this? I don't know. I've had this for a while. This is my pop filter, which keeps me from making obnoxious sounds every time I go into the microphone.
Yes.
And then swing arm, which allows me to be very mobile with this setup down here.
Nice.
And then Jeff, yeah, why not, Jeff? Do you have a YouTube channel?
I do not, but I do have a TikTok feed. It's Jeff York, Chicago, and I do 1 minute movie reviews only of films I like. I don't want to waste time trashing something, so I don't do them every week, but almost every week. And I also show Petty. I don't know if you know this, but I do caricatures with my reviews and films and TV shows that I like a lot. A little bit of an homage gives a little something special. This is something I like, so it gets a drawing. And I show a little bit of the process of drawing, or at least tie into how my drawing kind of reflects my take on the film as a critic in that 1 minute. And they're kind of fun. I mean, they move pretty fast and they don't take a lot of your time, as TikTok doesn't want to take a lot of your time. But it's a short little version of what I generally write much longer for on the establishing shot.
Well, Petty says I'm
Oh,
going to
thank
look for it.
you.
You don't have to look far, Petty, because if you go down to the description of this live stream, you'll see the Earth's Mightiest Critics links, and I believe Establishing Shot and Pipeline Artists are both linked down there, so you can go and get a flavor of that. But I'll also probably tomorrow when I'm putting up other links for this show, I'll link to Jeff's TikTok down there so you can check it out, because it is really cool to hear you commenting on the movies while you're drawing these amazing pictures.
Well, thank you,
Um,
friend. And
yeah.
Ian, if you follow Ian on Facebook, I did a caricature of Ian that he uses, I think, still as your
Oh yeah.
avatar.
That's not coming down, Jeff, until you draw the next one
Oh,
when I'm
woo-hoo.
95 years old and
Oh,
bald and
I'll-
have no teeth.
the next one is a family portrait for the Christmas card.
Oh. Well, I we kind of talked about South Park, Bigger, Logger, and Uncut. It's been a wide ranging conversation. I mean, we did talk about it, I kid, but it, as so many film conversations do, it opened up to a wide variety of topics and other films. And I'm really happy we got to talk about it. Jeff, do you have any closing thoughts on the South Park movie?
No, except that I wish they would do another musical. I mean, I love the Book of Mormon, and they occasionally do some songs for the show. I know that they're probably just, living off of the love that they still have for this show and the residuals from everything. But I hope they have one more musical in it in them, and they would share that with us. And whether it's an original animated movie or something for the stage would be great. But this one just reminded me of how few really great movie musicals there are. And this, like I said, is one of them. And they did a great Broadway musical too. So it'd be lovely if they'd give us at least one more. Sondheim was right into his late 80s. And I think these guys still have a couple decades to go.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm kind of glad. I would like to see another South Park musical. Again, assuming their hearts are in it, if they feel like they've got something big picture to say, because, I mean, as we talked about, they kind of have free reign week to week on their show to talk about whatever they want. And, yeah, there was, I don't know if it was a 60 Minutes piece or something, but, you know, it's probably a decade or two ago talking about their process. I don't know if it's
Mhm.
any different now in the age of computers and how old am I? But talking about how quickly they would make the show. I mean, they
Mhm.
were going almost right up until airtime,
Right,
creating these
right.
things, working like 24-hour cycles and with a team and all that. Famously, this movie came out in June 30th, 1999. I remember that because it was my birthday movie. But Star Wars, The Phantom Menace had come out the month before,
Uh-huh.
and people were amazed that they had that line from episode one, where the one soldier. We didn't talk about Operation Human Shield, where where Chef led the all black battalion as the
Yes.
frontline force in war against Canada. Oh my God! But the one guy said, "You said people are gonna die," and people like, okay, this movie came out a month before yours. How did you put this in your major motion picture? And I think one of them had said, well, the teaser trailer came out and they heard that line and they just thought, okay, this is going to be a punchline for years. We have to put this in our movie. And as Parker and Stoner want to do, they were prescient, and yeah, they made
Right.
it happen. It's a great line.
It is. It's very funny.
Um, but yeah, speaking of great lines, like and subscribe. That's a classic. But
For
no.
sure.
All right, Jeff. I appreciate you talking South Park bigger, longer, and uncut. I don't think we've come up with any criticisms. We are critics of the movie, of the movies, but I can't think of anything where I could point to it and say, yeah, this didn't work. I think it's one of those rare movies that for me, everything just, no pun intended, sings.
I agree. I think, if it's maybe a touch profane or some of it's a little obvious, that's equally, done 10 to 1 by all the stuff that's very sophisticated and clever in it. But I agree with you. I don't think there's really anything really wrong with this movie. And watching it again was a pleasure because it's like, wow, this is so good. Please do more. More. I want some more.
Me too. And I also want s'mores because I'm hungry. But
There you go.
okay, I was going to end the show, but Petty just
There you
he's going to get us talking for another hour. I can't handle myself. Well, I'm glad you're not on camera, Petty. No, but an off topic is coming. How did you two meet? Sorry, Jeff. How did we meet? My recollection of it is that we met at a double screening day. Was it Onward and Blood something, the Vin Diesel
Yeah,
movie? Was that when
that's
we
right.
first met
I
right
think it
before the
was, and
pandemic?
I would say hi to you, but then when and I watched your show before guesting on it, and then one day you approached me and said, "Hey, I'd like to have you as a guest on it. I can't believe you haven't yet." It's like, well, I'm glad you're asking now because I was waiting by the phones like a sad girl at prom.
It's because you were
And
waiting
now
by
it
the
becomes
phone, Jeff. I'm on the computer.
that's right. I know.
Yeah.
I become the new Don Shanahan. I think I'm giving him a run for his amount of appearances here, though he had a year head start, I think. But yeah, we become really friends and we get together outside of work too and have all kinds of fantastic conversations. And happy to bring some of that to you guys. And thank you so much for saying all that, Betty. You're a great guy yourself. And we love the fact that you watch and appreciate the show.
Yes, definitely. And I take advantage of the fact there are a few of them today. Yes, there's only the two of us. I expected this to be a larger panel, but I'm no concerns there because it's been a lot of fun. And yes, the crying, laughing face emojis. There's been a lot of that tonight, which is good. So yeah, I guess that's our not so secret origin story, and it's a relatively new friendship in my 47 years, but one that I definitely cherish.
Likewise, and
Many
then
more
we
years
found
to
out that we
come.
had so much in common too. That we're both American Academy of Art graduates and toil in the world of marketing and advertising and drawing and creativity. So we had a lot in common. You're kind of like my younger brother, Ian. I think I'll be it smarter and better looking. So damn you, youth.
Well, that could be debated. I don't know if I'm smarter, but also I if I had some malt liquor, I'd pour one out for the homies, i.e. the American Academy of Art, from which
That's
we both
right.
graduated, and we recently found out that it is closing. It's over 100-year institution. I got my degree in illustration, and was your illustration as well?
No, mine was advertising.
Advertising, yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
I think of you as an illustrator first, although
Well,
you are,
thank you. Thank
you've
you.
been in the advertising biz for forever. But yeah, it's closing down. It never quite, from what I understand, recovered from the pandemic. So I still have my degree up on the wall over there, which you'll probably
Wow,
never see because I don't think my camera reaches that way. But
that's
it does
impressive.
did exist, and I got the paper to prove it. Petty shares some black hearts.
Oh, the black hearts.
We all hate Ian because of how he looks.
Notice, Petty, that he did not say, Jeff, I don't know if I'm smarter than you, but I will take the better looking than you. So
Some
no,
things don't need to be said.
that's right.
No,
He didn't say that. Damn it.
all right. Well, I think we're going to leave it there. But yeah, Jeff York of the Establishing Shot and Pipeline Artist and TikTok fame.
There you go.
Thank you very much for hanging out. Thank you, Petty, for the super chats. You are incredibly generous every week, and we definitely appreciate it.
Sure do.
And yeah, everyone else who watched, we had a little fun little crowd tonight, and we definitely appreciate you. Jeff, next week, I was considering not doing a show, but I'm going to ask you. You're going to help me decide.
Okay.
Is long legs worth talking about?
Well, we've done a lot of horror on the thing, and I think it's very well done. I'm not sure it's quite as good as maybe some people will say, or I think it's well shot and very eerie and unsettling. But I think at the end of the day, the script is okay. The characterizations are good. It's very derivative. But I don't know. I mean, if I would almost rather you think of something more interesting to talk about. I think we could do like a 70s show, maybe a classic film from there, or maybe another one of, if you like this, you'll like that kind of thing. That might be more interesting. Not that you can't do long legs. I liked it. It made me unsettled watching it, which is, it's hard for me as a horror fan to, I don't like a lot of horror. And I know that sometimes to the great consternation of Katie and Mark on here, because they're aficionados and they love horror, but I'm a very picky horror guy, though I love the genre. And for me, it was an unsettling sit.
Well, let me put it this way, this to you, Jeff.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying we will do a show on long legs next week, but I'm saying if we do, maybe we'll do, if you liked long legs, you'll love. And the challenge would be to come up with a movie like you're saying long legs was atmospheric, cool in some parts, but the script was a letdown. To me, that was Maxine, which the episode on that is forthcoming.
Right.
Maybe we can look at what you would recommend.
That's a great thought.
In lieu of long legs.
Okay.
So we'll puzzle on that a bit, and yeah, we might have a live show next week. We might not. Who knows? The world's upside down. But yeah, as Petty says, bye. So yeah, thank you everybody for hanging out and watching. Be sure and like and subscribe if you dug this show. What did you think of the South Park movie? What are your favorite South Park memories? Were you offended? We didn't talk about this. Do you know anyone who was offended by the South Park movie? Don't answer that, because we'll talk for another hour. But not that I wouldn't love that. But yeah, let us know what you think down in the comments. And thank you, Jeff, again, and everyone out there. Till next time, whenever that is, whatever that is. Thanks very much. Take care. And I was going to say, shut your effing face, Uncle Effer, but that's no way to leave a show. I'll just say thanks and good night, I think. Yeah.